In our last lesson, we covered half squares and quarter squares. We will be revisiting that topic after I do this lesson number 2, because I want to show you how to have more autonomy with your fabric and how you're reading patterns. A big goal of mine is to help you to read patterns. Now, these were the fabrics that I have trimmed down that I can put on top of my AccuQuilt, and I'm going to be working with these for cutting this lesson number 2. And in lesson number 2, we're going to explore, this is how I had the fabric that was remaining. These are all my pieces that I used. And when I'm working with this much fabric in this way, I can actually, between cuttings, because a lot of times we're not going between cuttings by a week, but when I have this large amount of fabric like this, you can see that I've got it gradated out by the widths, and I'm going to stack these guys up on this. And what I like about how I can work with this fabric is I can roll it up, because a lot of times I'm not working on a fabric week to week, and this is how I'm going to keep it together so it's all nice and ironed. I put a lot of work into ironing it, and I don't have to re-iron it every time. So I've got some of the bigger pieces here that I'm going to be showing you today for this exercise. Now, in the last lesson we covered we covered half squares and quarter squares. This time we're going to be covering squares and rectangles. So I did a tiny bit of cutting in the last one, and we're going to be going to a different measurement. Now, the rulers that I'm going to show you in this one are the squares and rectangles from K. England, and these I like because they have measurements that make sense to me. My wide rulers are 7 inches across, which people are like, I cut a lot of 6.5. What I like about a 7-inch ruler across is that when I go to cut, I'm not trying to look over that edge to see the edge of it. I can see my 6.5 inches here by matching up my lines. So I'll go over that just a little bit more. The block we're going to make is a block that's going to go along with, it's going to be elements that we're going to be putting with the half squares and the quarter squares and the flying geese and the half square units. But we're going to be cutting these up in a different size. So technically, if I have a AccuQuilt 6-inch cube, that's what these would come from. Now, when I cut these pieces, I am going to be cutting some 2-inch squares, and I'm going to be cutting some 2 by 3.5-inch squares. So when I cut these, I have 2 layers of fabric stacked up here. This is one of my new favorite rotary cutters. This is a Fomori. These rotary cutters, the blades are resharpenable. You just send them to the company and they will resharpen it. And that's a really cool feature. Now, in this ruler, this is one of the rulers that comes in K's, squares, and rectangles. And I love it for this because I'm going to be cutting 2-inch squares out of this. And so this ruler is 4 inches across. So I'm going to do my first cut here. Because I'm not going to straighten up this edge, I'm going to swing that fabric around. And I'm going to do my second cut right here, and it's at 4 inches. Now, if you notice, I have fingers on the ruler, but then I have a finger off the ruler so it can keep it from sliding. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to bump this off. It was 4 inches, now to 2 inches. See that? Now I've got 2-inch strips that are in here. I'm going to turn my ruler, and I'm going to do this same thing. Now, if you have a rotating mat, this works terrific for this point. And this time I'm going to cut it here because I don't have the ability to flip that around because I have a whole bunch of little cut pieces in here, right? And then I'm going to back this off to 2 inches. And then this time when I cut it, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have a perpendicular line to make sure that I'm keeping my line as straight as possible. So now I have 2-inch squares. And voila, I have 2 by 2-inch squares. There we go. And I've got a little collection of them. Now, if you notice, I caught just one tiny little bit of thread there. This blade is not unsharp at this point. It is also, like, while I'm talking to you, sometimes I'm not cutting as straight and even. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little trick that I like to do is that if my blade seems like it's getting dull, before I sharpen this blade, send it in to be resharpened, or change my blade if I have on an Olfa, I'm going to flip the blade over one time. It won't give you twice the life of the blade, but it will give you a little bit longer. Now that last little piece that I have left over, I'm going to put that on here, and I'm going to cut those at 2 inches. So now I have even more squares, and I used up every little nibbit of that fabric. And that was just a leftover piece in there. Now when I look at this, I got 6 out of 3 colors, so I now have 18 fabrics. That's a lot. I am not going to keep cutting out of this piece those fabrics. I'm going to cut a mixture of fabrics. But I want to step on and I want to show you the next part of this unit that you're going to build. I'm going to actually be showing the whole unit that we're going to be using in this. And we're going to be using it for the whole quilt. Now, if you notice here, I am confident that this line along the side is square because I cut it earlier. Notice how it's a little bit off over here, but I'm confident that this part is going to be square. So I'm going to cut this side at 3 1/2 inches, 3 1/2 inches, and then I'm going to cut it down into 2 inches. So it's going to be 3 1/2 by 2, 3 1/2 by 2. So there we go. I'm going to be working on this piece, and I can actually swing this around here, and I can get a little bit brave, and I'm going to stack this up so I have 4 layers because I know my blade is nice and sharp and it's new, and so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to line it up perpendicular. Now it is not, if you're struggling with things fitting together well, do not cut through 4 layers of fabric at a time. It's not a good idea. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip this over and I'm going to put it on top of there, and if you notice I have it square. Now I'm going to cut my other 2 inches. There we go. Voila. So out of my fabrics, my mixture of fabrics, I've got 2 by 3 1/2 and 2 by 2 square. Or this is that piece that I told you needed the 2 yards out of. So out of this, I'm going to be cutting 2-inch squares. So I have a full width of fabric here. That's a lot of fabric for me to be working with in one full width. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it up once because I am confident with cutting it this way. Plus the fact I want to make sure my 2-inch squares are as accurate as I possibly can. And again, this is a ruler that's a 4 by 14-inch ruler. I love this ruler. It's nice and square. I am pretty sure this side is square, but just to be safe, I'm going to line this up. If you notice down here, this is the fold of the fabric. This is the part that's the most important that I get it straight, because if I don't get this straight, it's going to jag on me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this down. I'm leaving myself a little sliver here that I'm going to shave off later, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be cutting this at 4 inches. Nice and firm, 1 finger off, 4 fingers on. Get that fabric out of the way. I'm going to swing this around. And if you are working with a rotary cutter like a Fisker or something like that, notice that when you probably don't have the packaging yet, but it will say on that this is a cutter for materials. So it's not really designed for material. It's designed for all kinds of materials. That would be paper. The Fomori cutters that we're carrying right now that are, frankly, they're cheaper than the other brands that you see out there, but these and then the Omni that we carry in the store, the Olfas that we carry in the store, are they are designed for fabric. So now I've got my 4 inches that is cut. I'm past all those little strips that are going to give me some offensiveness, my salvages and my other fold, and I'm going to cut here. And if you notice at this point, I don't have a whole lot of latitude to move them, but I am going to move them a little bit, and I'm going to flip them over. I'm pretty confident that my cutting is going well. And again, if your rotary cutter, if your rotary cutter is not cutting through all these layers, come in, get a different rotary cutter or get different blades. There are a lot of inferior blades out there right now that you're seeing, especially online, that look like they're way cheaper than what you're getting in a quilt store. and they're cheaper because they're thinner and they don't hold up as well. And you're not going to be able to cut like what I just did there. So what I just did, cutting through that, I cut 4 layers out of this fabric. Easy, easy, easy. Okay, so I'm going to take these last pieces in here, and I'm going to cut these. Now, before I go and cut a whole bunch of these, I am actually going to sew some to make sure that my cutting has gone well. So I'm going to line this up with my 4 inches with my line along the bottom. Again, this is a 4-inch ruler, and these elements will be in a 6-inch cube. There you go. Easy, easy. And then I'm going to open up these last pieces because these are on my folds, and I will not be able to get that full width out of it, but I'm going to fix whatever. You can see it tips out just a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do when I cut these friends out, I'm going to cut past my 2 inches because I know that I'm not going to get a full piece. And I'm going to make sure this line down here is straight so that I'm cutting it. Oops, I moved a little bit. I had my fingers all in the piece there. And then we're going to cut it. We're going to swing it around. We're going to cut it again. And now we have a 2-inch. And this is going to be scrap. And you will not run out of fabric. You'll be fine. And on this one I'm going to do the same thing. Trim them down. And at this point, if you are using your rotary cutter to cut these, you're going to be going and you're going to be putting the block together. So I'm going to show you what this element, it's not the block, it's actually a part of a block. Now I don't have enough pieces out of this to get the scrappy look that I'm aiming for. This would be too much. So I'm going to step on and I'm going to show you which pieces that you're going to be cutting this out of the AccuQuilt. And so this is my 6-inch cube. These are 2-inch by 2-inch squares, and then this is die number 2, and this is die number 8, and these are the rectangles. And so when I go to use these guys, I'm going to be taking out my squares, and I can put 6 squares on top of these. So I'm going to choose my fabrics, and I'm going to stack them up on top of these pieces. Now if you notice when I'm doing this, what I'm doing here is I'm setting them as far over as I can on the one corner, and my purpose for doing that is that in case I have more room to put more pieces in here, then I want the latitude to be able to change my mind. Now when you watch AccuQuilt videos, they will tell you things like that you absolutely positively must cut these out so that the length of the fabric is going through. You do not have to absolutely positively do that. And so the reason that they tell you have to do it is occasionally when you do it, you're putting a stronger weave of fabric in there in a different direction that could cause your fabric not to cut all the way through. I would make peace with that, and I would just say close is good enough, and I can just get a scissor in there and trim that out if I need to. Now I'm going to go to my rectangles. And what's great about this is if you're counting the number of blocks that I have on that instruction, you're going to see how many you put through there. So on the 8, where it has 2 rectangles in there, every time I put 1 piece through there, I'm going to get 2. So when I send 6 layers through there, I'm going to get 12. On this die, where I have 4 squares, every time I send a fabric through there, I'm going to get 4 squares. Every time that I send through a stack of fabrics, like 6, I'm going to be getting 24 squares. And I'm going to get it in no time at all. I'm going to go over the cutter. So those are the cuts that we're going to be doing. When we go to sew these guys together, here's what they're going to look like. We're going to be sewing together first 4 patches. So we're going to put the 4 patch through, and this is going to create a terrific little chain block. And this chain block is going to be scrappy Scrappy, scrappy, scrappy. It's going to be, oh, did you catch that? It's going to be scrappy. Now, since I only have this much cut up, I can't show you how scrappy this is going to be. So you're going to look at it this way, where it's not going to be scrappy. But when I start sewing them, you're going to see that I'm going to sew them up scrappy. And look what's happening here. Might actually be easier for you to look at it this way, if I make all the colors the same. However, everything that you see in this piece that is magenta, of course I don't have one more rectangle, for crying out loud. Do I? Heavens to Betsy. Well, you get the idea. All of these fabrics will be scrappy. This is my accent fabric. So when I sew these together, I'm going to sew them together as a 4-patch. Then I'm going to sew the left and rights on together. I'm going to sew these pieces together, but I'm actually going to sew this together as a 9-patch. So once I get those center 4 patches done, I'm going to sew it together where I'm going to be sewing down this row, then I'm going to sew down this row, then I'm going to cross cut it, so I'll be chain piecing that. So those are some things that I'm looking forward to showing you that I'm going to be doing. For later on, we are going to need squares that are 12.5 inches from our collection of fabrics. So what I have done with this whole piece is that I've stacked up my fabrics largest on the bottom, so largest length of fabric. This is my fold over here, and I've got a fabric in here, for example, that's not in the same height, and so I'm going to pull that fabric and show you how I did this. I wasn't so concerned about how wide they were from the fold to what I cut last time, but this is how I like to sort my fabric, so that when I'm working on it for AccuQuilt or any scrap quilts, I can frankly see all of my fabric. So when I put this piece in here, I see it has to probably go above this green piece. So I'm going to pull that piece out there, and I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to set it over here. Now, I don't typically do this, but I don't want you to get confused. This is an extra piece of fabric that I found in my stash, and I was like, well, I can definitely use this as part of the pieces. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to set it aside, and I'll show you what this looks like. So this was, in my first lesson, I cut off about that 6 inches off the side of this with the fabric. I now can see most of my fabrics. I have a few of them hiding underneath there, underneath pieces that are the same size. But I have all these fabrics set this way. I need to set aside for these blocks a I'm going to say 13 inch because we are going to trim it down. So I want to make sure we set aside a 13-inch square of all of these fabrics. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my biggest ruler that I have out there, and this one happens to be 14. I also like a 20-inch ruler, which is really great. But if you look, 13 inches is way over here. I'm going to be giving up a whole lot of fabric. However, if you look at this, all these fabrics from here up don't qualify. I can't use them because they're not 13 inches. So I'm going to pull all these fabrics above this line. Let me make sure I've got that right. Yeah, there we go. Everything in here, and I'm going to roll them up and set them aside because I'm going to use them for my other pieces. Now, you'll see there's a number in there that I have written for whether you're doing lap size or the queen size. And with those, you'll see how many squares that you're going to need to set aside. Now, this also might be why when you go through and you look at your fabric and you look at what else is in there that you have. And for this one, I'm going to need 19 squares. So when I go through and count, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and then I'm going to need more squares. We do have options that we're going to be working with later, but I'm going to go ahead and set these aside because I'm going to have to find some other options. However, I don't want to lose this. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to cut this out at about 13 inches. Now I could cut from that side, from the cut side rather than the fold side, but I really want to make sure, because like down here I can see I have a fabric that's not quite that whole width. I don't want to run into that too many times. So I'm going to make sure I'm well past the folds. I can actually pull all these folds forward. Here we go. And then I'm picking them up by the folds. So all of the folds of the fabric are all together. Now I'm going to cut this at 13 inches. It can be 13 and a half. We will trim it down later on after we do some measuring of your block. We just don't want to leave you with not enough fabric. So now I'm going to grab my 60 millimeter ruler because I want my big girl to help me out with this. And I'm going to make sure that I'm past my 13 inches. And I'm going to cut all this down. I love a 60 millimeter, but I especially love it for things like this. And I'm going to turn it, swing it this way a little bit. And again, this is a rough cut. This is not accurate. This is just past 13 inches. Now, I now have most of what I need to set aside for these other pieces. Now, let's say I absolutely run out of fabric. Trust me, I'm going to have a solution for you that you're going to love, and it's an easy one. But for now, I'm going to set these friends aside. And if you want to put a mark on those, I would positively do this. I would also then venture that while this fabric is still here, I'm going to look at this and say, that is going to fit on to that die that way. So I'm going to go through here and say, what can I salvage while it's here? Will that one fit on that die? It's going to be close, but I think it'll work. And I can go in like this and set them on there, or I can lay them out like this, laying the smallest piece on the top. And this one I've said no to. And then I'm going to cut them. Again, this is why we're using up these scraps now while they're on the cutting table. It is a whole lot easier to cut them up now than it is for me to come back later on and dig through them. Now, this is the way I'm going to lay them on this board. I could have put them on my 2.5 inch board too. These have to be about 4 inches. So there I've got 3 fabrics. I've got 6 fabrics. And then I'm going to lay them on that board to be cutting it. And there I've got my last piece that I'm going to put in there. So I'm going to find whatever I can salvage out of these scraps. These are not salvageable to some extent. It depends on how tolerant you are to mess with those friends. And so that's your call. So I'm going to go look at my next lines. Clearly these top ones go in my scrap bin. Or excuse me, they go in my garbage can in my place. So for you, if you're the person who you actually know you're going to come back and cut them down, and I'm not saying I'm going to come check on you, but you have to kind of be honest with yourself if you're going to do something with them, because otherwise it's just going to become one more thing that you have to deal with. So you see I'm cutting these down so they're going to fit on this piece. Now I could make them fit like these little guys right here. See those little pieces? I'm going to put those on my 2-inch squares to go through and cut those out like that. So what I just did was made nibbits of nothing out of everything that I had here. Now when I go back and look at these smaller pieces, I'm going to now cut these down and put them on my 2 by 3.5 inch rectangles. I'm going to put them on my 2 by 2 inch squares and my 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares, and then I'm going to start sewing them. So we're on our way, and that's some extra things about cutting. So I've got my squares here that I've cut from my elements. I have my rectangles that I've cut, and then I have my accent squares right here that I'm working with. So these are the pieces that are going to define what this block looks like. Now I'm going to go in and first send through a 4-patch because that's how the units that we're building are all built. And when I build that 4-patch, I'm going to look for a mixture of fabrics. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm putting my accent fabric in. I've got my Annie Stiletto here. I also have my Ginger thread clips, and I have my point-to-point turner here. These are my go-to tools for right next to my piecing. I have lengthened my stitch out. I'm at a 2.7 stitch on my machine because I don't want to have to pull all those stitches out. My seam quality is good, and I do not need it as tight as if I was sewing the back of a pair of pants. say for instance. So I'm going to send the 4-patch through, and if you notice, on the one of them I put my dark fabric facing up on the bottom and facing down the top. So I've got my 4-patch going through there. Now I'm still working on the last of my elements from lesson 1, so that should make you feel good. And I pulled a couple of them out because when I left them in the machine after my last sewing, and now I'm going ahead and I'm pressing them down. I am down to just my half square triangles. I'm making mine fairly sizable, my quilts, so I have quite a few of them yet to do, but I'm quite fine with doing it this way. These are called enders and leaders, and what I believe in is that a lot of times people use a scrap of fabric and they'll just send it through their sewing machine, and the problem with that is that you aren't getting anything done except creating these things that look like spiders. Now I want to release that 4-patch in the back, and therefore I'm going to go and I'm going to take another one of my half square triangles and I'm going to tuck it into the machine so that I can release that, mostly so that I can show you what this block, what this unit looks like. It's not really a block, it's a unit that we're going to be using in the finishing. And then I'm going to reach around the back with my Ginger snips, snip those friends off. I'm going to be bossing those seams towards the dark on each one of these. I love this point-to-point turner. It does such a terrific job of getting that nice and flat. Now they're connected together, so this is called strip piecing. And I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to walk them into the machine. I love putting that stiletto up there, raising my foot with my freehand system by pushing over just on my knee. Lift, or freehand system is what it's actually called. And so then I can get that seam in there and get the seams going in the correct direction. Now I'm going to reach around the back and I'm going to bring out that half square triangle, and another half square triangle is done while it gave me the chance to send that piece through. So I have my 4-patch, which is the center of the unit that we're working on today, and then I'm going to grab my 4 rectangles that I'm going to put around the outside edge. And I want to mix up these fabrics a fair amount, so I just went ahead and I pulled 4 different rectangles that I'm going to put together. Now on these rectangles, on 2 of them, I am going to be putting, one of them they're going to have a colored square on them in the corners. Because of the 4 corners of this unit, towards that outside edge, I have 2 corners that are going to be dark and 2 that are going to have my accent. So 2 of them are going to be dark, but I want a little bit of a contrast in there. And I'm going to reach around the back and grab out that 4-patch because they're all ready. See how great that's looking? And then I'm going to go ahead and press this out. And now on this, I'm going to take the 2 rectangles and I'm going to put it on either side of it. Now if you notice, even though I grab this and my seam is going up on this as I come up towards the needle, it doesn't really bother me because I can see where that seam is, and then I can also use my stiletto to guide that underneath the foot so it doesn't bump that seam going in a twisted direction. I'm going to reach around the back on these guys, pull them out, and then this time when I do this, I'm going to press it away from that corner. So I'm pressing it towards the green on this one, and then I'm pressing this one towards the rectangle. So I'm pushing them both towards the rectangle. Now on the other end of these pieces, I'm now going to add in one of my accent pieces. So while this block is going to have some symmetry, it's also going to have some really interesting features to it in the finished project when you see how this comes out. Alright, so we're going to bring it around. We're going to look at these pieces, and we still have to add another rectangle to the other side of this piece. So I'm going to go ahead, press this way, press this way. I'm going to add another rectangle to the outside edge of my 4-patch, and I'm going to come in here into the machine. Look at how beautifully that's sewing together. Now if yours are not fitting up against that rectangle, you might want to investigate your sewing, your stitch, your 1/4 inch. We want an accurate 1/4 inch. We do not want a scant 1/4 inch. You'll hear people talk about a scant 1/4 inch. A scant 1/4 inch is bad math. You don't need a scant 1/4 inch. And the more you get into accurate cutting and piecing, the happier you're going to be that you don't talk in that language of scant quarter inch. Now, if you notice, everything's underneath the needle. I really can't do anything with this. I can't release it to add those rectangles onto there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send through another 4-patch. Okay? So we're going to be bringing in 4-patch number 2. And I'm going to pull out a little bit of that raspberry color to put in here. I like, in mine, I have some aqua, I have some navy blue, I have some raspberry, I've got some purple, even have some black. I have a little bit of metallic on a lot of my pieces. So I have my full 4-patch in there. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull out my blocks so far of what I have going on. And then I'm going to be putting it in here, and I'm going to press those seams towards that rectangle so I can see where I'm going. And I've got that swinging out there. And now, if you notice this piece in here, I can go ahead and put this in here. Now, it's critical that I have these accent pieces going in a row, in a diagonal. So therefore, I had to flip that piece around. Thankfully, I don't have directional fabric to work with, and I can actually work with this just in a really clever movement. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to swing into the machine. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew right on up here into that space. I have that side put in this piece. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to release 4-patch number 2. And now that I have 4-patch number 2 in there, I'm going to press towards the darks. This is already working on to my second unit that I'm going to be working on. And then I'm going to send it right into the machine. Raising my foot a little bit with my freehand system. On this machine I have a freehand system, which means I push over with my knee on that and it lifts my foot up with my presser foot up so I can keep my hands right on my work. If you have one for your machine, I'd recommend you start getting more comfortable with it. Some people feel that they're a little nervous about working with it, but it's like giving you a third set of hands because now you can work on these pieces. Now look at how great that looks. I got to add a little bit more pop of color, and my accent is right in there. And look what's going on here. Yep, I'm not going to worry about that I've got 2 colors next to each other. And the main reason is I wouldn't worry about it because I don't want to go on and make another piece to go with it. And in the big scheme of things, when you see the smash of color that this project is, you're going to be so glad that you had some courage and stepped off and brought in everything but the kitchen sink. Now, if you didn't, if this is your first Mystery Monday, you might have hesitated a little bit. It won't go wrong, I promise. You're still going to be so pleased with what you accomplished. So I'm reaching back in the back. I'm going to pull out my 4-patch number 2. Here it is. See that? Now, when I've got 4-patch number 2, I'm going to pull out my next 4 fabrics for around the outside edge. And I dug a little deeper into my stash here and seeing if I can pull out some different ones than I had in the last one. Let's see what I choose for that raspberry. Pull a different one out. I kind of gravitate towards raspberry on this one because I feel like I should have one piece in each one. However, in the end, I don't have as much raspberry in there. So that's the other reason we didn't have you cut all the fabric up for this, because as you get going, you might say, hey, I really need more raspberry, and so then my next cuts, I might go digging through my stash and looking for more raspberry because I feel like I have a lot of navy and green in here. And maybe not. Maybe, if I'm really committed to using up all my fabrics, there it is, voila, look at that. So you see this chain that's going here with my accent fabrics, that's what I'm leaning towards. Before I go any further, I'm going to press this out. And like I said, that'll bother you if that's yours. It does not bother me. And if it bothers you, then you could just set that piece aside and come back to it later. Now, on these other fabrics that we're working with, we're going to take 2 of them out. We're going to be putting 2 of the light corners on one side. And for me, it's light. For you, it might not be. These are my accent fabrics. This cream is my accent. And then on the other end of each one of these, we're going to be attaching one of that whole big cacophony of fabrics that we had. And so for me, it was about 28 fat quarters or leftovers of fabrics. So I'm going to go ahead and press this friend out, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to push this fabric onto the side. Now, when we're doing those pieces that we're adding the light square to the one corner and the dark to the other corner, it is true there's a little bit of directionality in there, and it'll probably take you 4 or 5 blocks before you start getting the rhythm of what that looks like. And like I said, I wanted you to see on that first one that it didn't matter to me that those two fabrics were right next to each other. In the big scheme of things, even the study of that, by somebody who's looking at every little inch of your quilt, trying to go to sleep and looking at all your quilts, they might notice it, but they're never going to say, wow, what were they thinking? It's like, it just is what it is, and by that time it's going to be all finished and put together and done. Alright, so I'm going to grab another fabric here. I am digging through on my left hand side here all my fabrics. It's starting to turn into quite a heap of interesting stuff, and that's okay, because it is my sandbox. So I'm sewing in the middle of my sandbox. Alright, here we go. Here's my next pieces. Pulling this piece out, pushing it in the directions it needs to go, opening up this, making sure we're pressing the other seam towards that center rectangle. Now look what's happening here. At this point, I have to get this so that it's a diagonal here. Now, if I would have done this, then it would have been up against that piece. This is when I can actually change it early on. Now, when I bring this out of the machine, I'm noticing that I have, once again, that fabric next to that fabric. This time I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to set that one aside, and I'm going to go and build another one. And you can see that you have choices. On the first one I did it. I'm not willing to do it on the second one. Now, you can spend all the time picking your fabrics for each block, and you sure can do that. But I think you have to decide what your priority is. If that's your priority, you may just pause a little bit and look at it. But I would probably go into it like 6 or 8 blocks before I'd start over managing it. And worst of all, unsewing it. This unit that I just built that I feel I can't use in the side of this because I already have it in the 4-patch is going to come in very handy, and it's going to come in handy in my very next unit that I'm going to be working with. And so I'm going to pull out a fabric that I know I didn't use in this at all, and then I'm going to pull out another color that I am sure that I did not use in this, and I'm going to look at this and say, where is that going to land? And here we go. I'm going to use this navy blue, which isn't anywhere in that block. Ta-da! So now I'm going to send it into the sewing machine. Now at this point I'm going to go grab one of those half square triangles that's still sitting over here waiting to be completed. And I'm going to send it in there because I want to release both of those pieces and show you what I just accomplished. I am not an advocate of you chain piecing all those centers together. Please don't do that, because when you do that, it just really creates a lot of expectations and it slows you up. And if you go ahead and piece all those centers together and you find that you have something that's wrong on it, you are going to have to unpiece them. And if I go through and I do a complete unit at a time, I can see the completion of that unit. I can see if it's successful or if it's not successful. I also don't have to do a whole lot of unsewing. So that's really why I work like this. It also helps me to be more confident that what I'm doing is getting done correctly, but it also helps me be more confident with the fact that I don't get overly worked up over the colors or where they land. I am focusing, by doing a complete block at a time, at getting the most accurate block possible each time. And if I learn that block by block, it's better off than learning it after spending 2 or 3 hours sewing together a whole bunch of 4 patches that I now discovered that I have something that's not correct. Okay, so here we go. We're going to push these towards our rectangle friend on both ends. We're going to tuck it into here. We're going to make sure we're going to audition it while it's sitting here. That's how it's going to land in there. Look at how beautiful that is. I like to put the one that has one more seam in it on the top, so I can make sure that that seam is going the direction that I want it to go. Putting into the machine. Before I get too far, I go and land where the end of it's going to be. I make sure this piece is in place. And there we go. Come up here, release that little half square triangle the way it needs to be released, and make sure that it's where I need it to be. Pulling this out like this, looking at that, determining that it's really in good shape. Now in this next part that I'm going to show you, I'm going to go back and I'm going to pick up that first piece that I did, and I'm going to be piecing this together into a big 4-patch. So this unit was cut. It's a 6.5 inch square, and when I cut that 6.5 inch square, I can cut it with my rotary cutter. I actually cut this with using my AccuQuilt, and with my AccuQuilt I cut it with die number 1 from cube number, the 12 inch cube. So if you notice, the first piece to this 4-patch, the last part of it's up here. I'm going to take this first piece and I'm going to walk it into the machine this way. I'm going to grab this piece instead of this blue, and I'm going to put it in here because it's going to be the one side of the chain. Now the goal is that chain, that diagonal chain of the accent fabric, is going to go the same direction. Is it left to right or right to left or top to bottom? It's diagonal, and the great thing about the block is the block can be turned at a 90 degree and it will still show up with that chain going diagonally. So notice this, my chain was there, and so if I flip that over, it's still going to go this way. So now I'm going to grab this fabric and I'm going to send it into the sewing machine. Now before I do that, I want to press that seam out. I want to make sure that I have it going in the right direction on both of them. And I now have an oversized 4-patch here. See this? Now it's all within that machine. All right. Now let's go back and let's make a little 4-patch, because we're going to start our block number 3. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send in a 4-patch. I'm going to do the whole 4-patching here. I'm not going to do just part of it and come back and do the other part later. I'm going to get the whole thing done. So I'm going to send it into the machine this way. I'm going to reach up and I'm going to trim this out like this. And now what I'm going to do is take this whole piece. I'm going to open it up. There it is, right sides together. I'm going to send it into the sewing machine with that top corner up there, and I'm going to walk it into the machine. Now I can always turn it up and look to see if I've got the seams going in the right direction. If they're not, I can always put my Annie's Tailor's Awl underneath there and push that seam so it's going in the correct direction. Here we go. Those two seams are locking together. If your block is not coming out to fit on that 6.5 inch, you're going to want to check your cutting. If you're AccuQuilt cutting it, it's probably not the problem, but you're also going to want to check your sewing to make sure that your 1/4 inch is an accurate 1/4 inch. Scant 1/4 inch is not true. Alright, here we go. And then we're going to push this towards my darks. The other thing is make sure you check your presser foot pressure control. Presser foot pressure control is in a lot of machines. You maybe would want to lighten it up, because on good quality machines, the presser foot pressure control is set so that it could go through a lot of layers of denim. if I'm only going through a few layers of cotton, standard cotton, it's not going to be the same presser foot pressure control. Now look at this. Look at how pretty that is. My chain is going this direction. Well, notice if I send it this direction, it's still doing its job. It's still doing its job. So it's only directional in that every time you open this up, you need to see your accent piece on a diagonal. And so that's the important piece to getting this accurate. I'm going to want to go in and make sure that I've got enough of these big squares before I cut too much. You do not want to cut this out of those bigger 12, those 13-inch squares that we set aside. And so you might need a little bit more fabric for this, but I promise you this is going to be a stunning addition to your project. You're going to really like how this works and how it brings it all together. And so as we look at this, I'm going to head into the machine. I've got my next 4-patch sending in there. I'm going to go in. I've got one whole side of this thing done. So now I'm going to go and grab another one of my rectangles, and I'm going to send it through with that accent fabric on just one end, because I'm not going to need it on both ends, because remember, I'm going to have to put another dark on the other end of this. So I'm going to come out of the machine here, and then I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and then I'm going to press it back, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up another rectangle and sew it onto the one side of this to finish this out. Now I noticed on this one I ended up like getting a little distracted when I was putting my 4-patch together, and it didn't come out exactly the size. So I actually just pushed a little bit more fabric underneath that one. I'm going to go back in the back, and I'm going to release that piece. I'm going to press it in this way, and I'm going to go grab another fabric corner and put it on the other side of this piece. I think this little minty green leaf thing is going to work out terrific. And I'm going to tuck it onto that corner. And then I'm going to continue through making all of these pieces to fit together unit by unit. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to press this one back, and I'm going to grab another rectangle and put it on the other side. Put this one on the other side. Now I'm stuck again because, as you can see, I have all my units put together. This is the part where you want to make sure you're not getting stuck too much. And it's not the end of the world if you get stuck. It's kind of like doing a puzzle, and you want to figure this out so that you can get this done without having to do a whole lot of enders and leaders in there. And if you notice, I'm moving on to another color of my half square triangles. I'm going in here, pressing this out. I now have this ready to put that piece on. So I have my one side. And then when I go into the machine and come out, I have a choice. I can put a half square triangle in there, or I can start another 4-patch. Once you start working this way, you won't go back to doing 10 billion 4-patches and hoping to get the other sides on there. It actually honors who you are as a person, gives you a chance to take your time, do it accurately and do it well. And actually, my favorite part is I get to celebrate my progress. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start another little 4-patch so that I'm on to my next one. Now occasionally this happens, and I'm going to tell you I'm not real sure on this one if it's accurate, but I chose one that might look a little bit short. This one looks a little bit short of 2 inches. That means that I probably, when I sent it through my AccuQuilt, it might have been short on the die, and I just use the match of the two of them, and if it's short on this side, I make sure that when I'm looking at that other side that the loss that I have is stuck in the seam. And so if I'm a little bit short on the one side over the other one, then I'm actually making it up before I desert that block. So there's my 4-patch, my 2 pieces in for my next 4-patch. And here we go. We're going to move this out, press this down. Look at this. Voila, we're able to use this last piece. We're going to put this in here, making sure our diagonal is going the same direction of our accent fabrics. I'm going to turn it around, send it into the machine. Now I'm going to realign it as I head down towards that last corner. And you can see it just fits in there like a glove. I'm going to come around the back. I'm going to release that little 4-patch friend. I'm going to bring it out here. I'm going to press my seams towards the dark fabrics. I'm going to tuck it in together, and I'm going to send it in the machine. And I have unit number 3 coming out of the back of the machine already. And truly, I just timed this whole thing, and it took me 27 minutes to do everything to get 3 of those units done. There we go. There's my next one. This unit will finish out 12.5 inches raw edge to raw edge, which is a 12-inch finished block. When the reveal is done at the end of Mystery Monday, I'm going to show you a project that is only going to use this unit set, and it's a stunner. It's a really fun one to do. Now, you can do this in different sizes. However, for this to fit together with the other units in this one, we need this to measure 12 inches for a 12-inch finished block unit, for it to fit together with the other pieces that we're putting together in this. This one in particular was made with a 6-inch cube, but as you see from the instructions, I show you how to cut this traditional rotary cutting. And you're going to understand that pretty soon that the best way to have the cubes, the top one that you should get every time is an 8-inch finished cube, because I would say easily as much as half of the quilts that are out there are cut with 2.5 and 4.5-inch units. A 6-inch cube is cut with 2 inches and 3.5 inches. So when you see those measurements, you'll see things like this coming out. Now with this one, we're going to be able to, we're pairing together the 8-inch cube and the 6-inch cube. And people will ask, what's the best order that I should buy the cubes in? I always recommend that you buy the 8-inch cube first, because that is your 2.5 and 4.5, and that's one of the best bundles that's out there, and it's because it's one of the best recommended pieces. After that, I would get the 8-inch angles and the corners cubes. And those are ones that companion with your 8-inch, but there are a lot of 12-inch blocks that you can make with these 3, even though it's an 8-inch cube. And that's part of the beauty of attending things with Inspired to Sew. We're going to show you how to make the most out of these. So the 8-inch mix and match is a great piece to use this. Now, the great thing about this is when you're talking about things like a cube, if you just buy the cube even at regular price, it's like saving 40% on the dies. It's a huge savings to buy them this way. We also appreciate that you buy them from Inspired to Sew. We love supporting you on it, and we appreciate you supporting us so that we can continue to offer great education like Mystery Monday and our AccuQuilt classes that you're going to be seeing more and more of as we evolve more of them to the virtual platform like what you're attending right now. And so these are great bargains for you to get. Now the angles and the corners are ones that you see in a lot of designs that are out there, but a lot of times people have you, the designers will have you buy a specialty ruler or specialty templates that you can only use for that one piece. These open up the door wide. Now, as I said, the 8-inch cube can make a lot of 12-inch blocks, but it also, if you put those 2.5s together into a 9-patch, you can make it a 6.5-inch edge to edge, which is a 6-inch finished. Those are in the 12-inch cube. This is the second cube that I recommend that you buy. A 12-inch cube is great for those of you who have a lot of fabric or a lot of big print fabric and you don't want to chop it down. The 12-inch cube is glorious for this. But what starts to happen, and this is what happened with me, is when I started working more with the 8-inch and getting really confident with it and pairing it up with my 12-inch, I wanted to make smaller things. And that is when it takes me over to the 6-inch cube. So when we're doing this lesson, we are pairing up the 6-inch cube with an 8-inch cube as well.
And what's great about this is that you get that intricate piecing. You actually want to piece things that are smaller. And it's not because your eyesight is getting better, it's because your accuracy is getting better because you are getting the most accurate cuts. We will continue to offer you specialty ruler instruction as far as how to use specialty rulers to pair with these pieces. But I would recommend that you look at AccuQuilt. If you want us to do a virtual demonstration with you, we're happy to show you what this actually works like. There probably is nothing in my sewing room that's changed how I've gotten through a lot more fabric than AccuQuilt, because I'm not spending hours and hours and hours of cutting. I can cut out a queen size quilt in about an hour and a half. It's great that you have friends that let you borrow their equipment. It is probably time for you to get your own AccuQuilt, because you don't go and borrow your friend's sewing machine. You want to have your own things, because then you can play with your fabric at any time without having to borrow it. Thank you for being inspired to sew with us. We're going to go on and look at some more extending the lesson with Mystery Monday. So give me a moment and we'll be right over there.